Hello and welcome to a Flosstube Extra from the Stitching Owl. Today we are going to be learning how to make a shaped pillow for the 12 Days of Christmas mini stockings that are an Annie B's folk art pattern. Now I am doing a stitch along with Dottie the Stitching Scotty and a number of other Flosstubers. I'm so pleased to see so many people have embraced this idea, and I want to provide you with more than one way to actually do the fully finishing of these items, so that whether you are an accomplished seamstress, have used your sewing machine on occasion, or heavenly days, don't even own one, you feel comfortable finishing this off. So today, I am going to be using my blue stocking. Many of you know and have seen on Instagram and my Flosstubes that I am stitching this 3 ways. I actually have a 4th way cut out, but I don't think I've got the time to do the 4th one just right now. So in this way, I will do a set of 3 videos that show you 3 different ways to do this. And I'm also showing you different colors. This one's blue. I've also got white and red. And my friend Dottie the Stitching Scotty and Annie the Proper Stitcher can demonstrate their stitches on black very, very well. So step number 1 is you've got to do your stitching. Now, this does not take a long time to do. It really doesn't. And you can see that I didn't give myself like 3 inches on all sides, because I know I'm going to be sewing this, and I have a tiny hoop that I use that this will fit around this beautifully. So you're going to do your stitching, and you're going to do any beading and embellishments that you want. If you want to put on the year or good grief. Some of us have little like 2024s that we have purchased from Amazon that are just a little charm. Now's the time to stitch that on. Don't wait till after the whole thing's finished. Okay, so step 1 is to do your stitching. Step 2 is to consult your 12 Days of Christmas Stocking book. So when you get to pattern number 11 and 12, the next page to the right shows you number 11 and 12, of course, because you have full pictures throughout. And then you're going to turn your page. Now, I'm not going to hold it up because I feel that it's important that I preserve the copyright of every page in this book. But when you turn this page, you're going to see a template for the stocking. So you need to go to your printer, and if you don't have a printer scanner, you can certainly go to a place like Office Depot or Staples, depending on where you are in the world. And what I did is, for the stockings that I have created on a 14 count Aida or 28 count even weave, I'm simply going to print it out at 100%. Straight scan. For the 32 count Lagana or 16 count, I scanned it at 90%. If you decided to go even smaller and went to 18 or 36 count, then I scanned it at 85%. So what I then did was I glued the scan to a piece of comic book board, and I played it ultra safe, and I actually made a double layer of comic book board, which can be held together either with 2-sided tape or with a glue stick, which is what I chose to do this time. I glue sticked this on, and I cut around, and I now have a really sturdy template. So I've done this for each of my sizes. And then the next thing that I encourage you to do is to check. Just because I like these percentages, it doesn't mean that that's what you like. You might want a little bit more material showing around the edge of your stitch. So I would hold it up to a window or put it on a light box to see whether the shadow shows you the stitch with the right amount of blank space around. So I've got a picture of myself holding it up to a window. Of course, when you take it into the light, you get more of a silhouette, but you can see the stocking and the bird and a little bit of the pear. And then this, I think if I hold it against the white wall, there we go. You can see that my stocking up here, I really am keeping it fairly close, and there's enough to have a toe here, but not a lot of space, and again, not a lot of space over here. If you want more space, then instead of 90%, you might want like 92 or 93%. Play around and make it your own. Okay, so step 3 is to trace around this template. I'm just going to take a moment and say, I am assuming that you have ironed this, because we don't want to make a stocking out of a crinkle job. When you iron something that has beads and or embellishments, please put a fluffy towel on your ironing board surface and then put this face down so that you iron on the back side only, and the fluffy surface of the towel absorbs the shapes of your embellishments so that you won't have any breakage. So that's just my word to the wise. And that's something that my mother taught me a long time ago. I personally haven't had anything go wrong because I've always done this, but I have a feeling that she tried it the other way and experienced a sad moment. So I traced around this on interfacing. Now I'm using a lightweight interfacing because I'm a quilter and have made a number of t-shirt quilts for our friends. And so I have little chunks of it left over. Now, understand that when you have this, you want your interfacing to be the correct juxtaposition. Your interfacing has a smooth side and a bumpy side. The bumpy side is the side that has the glue, and that's what you were going to iron on to your stitch. So I personally found it easier to go around my template with a pen, and you can certainly use a friction pen. On the smooth side, the pen didn't really want to work very well on the bumpy side. But I had to make sure that my bumpy side, which is this side, when I put it onto the back of my stitch, was going the right direction. So this is smooth going out, the bumpy side is here, the back side of my stitch is here, and my good side is out here. So step 3 is tracing around your template onto interfacing. Before you cut out your shape, make sure that when you place it on your stitch that you've got your stocking pointed the right direction for the bumps to be against the back side. And then cut around. Now you'll notice that I did not add what's called a seam allowance. When I do stockings, I find that if I put in interfacing and make it big enough that I actually am stitching through it as well as the stocking and ultimately the backing. When I go to turn it, I have a harder time getting a clean edge. It's bulky. So therefore, I made my interfacing the exact size of my stocking that I want the size to finish at. This might not be your choice. You might prefer to know that you're anchored well in the seam and you have experience with your interfacing being successful going into your seam allowance. So this is a personal choice. So I recommend that you, if this is the first time you're using interfacing, perhaps it would be wise to grab an old pillowcase, the back of a shirt, perhaps a man's shirt that is cotton rather than something that's stretchy, and actually try this out without cutting up your stitched element first. So because I've done a number of stockings, I think I'm just going to dive in and do it on the stocking, but I do encourage a little bit of playing on extra fabric first. So my next step is to return to my ironing area, and I'm going to iron this to the back side of this using the instructions that are on my particular kind of interfacing. Some of them will say a certain amount of seconds and the next one will say a different amount. Take care that when you are applying interfacing, that you understand that you're pressing, not ironing. You're going to go straight down and hold for the amount of seconds, and instead of going like this, you're going to actually lift straight up and then go to any area that your iron couldn't cover. Now it's possible that you have an iron big enough to cover the whole thing on one shot. That's fabulous, but make sure you're pressing, not ironing this. So that is the next step. So we have now finished 3 steps of 12. Step 4. So you've got everything all set for having your interfacing on your back. And the next thing to do is to cut around, I know, get the scissors out, I'm so sorry, but we do have to cut that material, and we're going to cut around the shape. But what you're going to notice is that I'm going to add a 1/4 inch around these sides all the way around. It can be a bit more if you are thinking you don't trust yourself and you want a bit bigger. There are people that certainly do like a 3/8 or 1/2 inch seam on this. So you're going to carefully cut around it. If you don't trust yourself, one of the things you can do is to lay this on your stitch, like covering up your stitch very carefully, and then you could put dashed lines around at a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch all the way around, and then cut on the dotted line. If you've been quilting for as long as I have, you eyeball it. So we end up with a stitch that looks like this. Step 5. So you've got the right shape. Then you notice that, hey, Karen had this dark spot all the way around. So this is a personal choice. You don't have to do this. One of the things that we have to do in order to be able to sew this together and have a smooth finish is we're going to have to clip our curves. These are woven materials that can fray. So therefore, what I did was I sprayed a little bit of Fray Check. You can use Fray Check. You can use anything that is slightly gluey. And my mother would default to, well, at least I've got some clear nail polish in the house. And I've just gone lightly around. So I sprayed it into a little container, and then I used a paintbrush and I painted it around the edge. And right now I am waiting for it to dry before I do the next step. So that means that step 5 is actually just securing your edges. I didn't do the top because it is covered with a zigzag stitch from my original stitch. But I know that I zigzag everything. So I'm now going to let this dry before I go on to the next stage. So it's the perfect time for you to get in a walk around the block, a snack. Yeah, I need a good 10 minutes to let this air dry before I continue on to the next stage. So there you go with step 5 being finished. Step 6. We are ready to go on. So we are at step 6, and it is a let's think ahead step. I have chosen my backing fabric. Now, many of you are going to pick something very Christmassy, totally fine. Some of you might even just choose to pick the fabric that you stitched on to be the back as well. That works beautifully. Because I'm on a blue, have chosen this swirly, it's almost like Starry Night. My main thing was to look in my stash, find something that was the right color and that I had enough to do all 12 stockings, because that is an important aspect of this. So what I've done is you can see, I've got back side, so I've got pretty side to pretty side. I pinned this together and I'm now going to cut around the shape so that I've got the back the right side. A lot of people will go, oh, okay, here it is, and they will put their stitch right side up and cut around, which doesn't work when you've got a special shape. It does if it's a square or a rectangle, but when it's a special shape, you have to make sure that you're doing pretty side to pretty side and that you cut around it. Now, I am not going to apply interfacing to my cotton. I don't think that it's necessary, but if you are more comfortable doing that, that's fine. And if you are choosing to use like your linen or even weave or even Aida as your back so that it matches perfectly, you might choose to interface that because it's a woven. Each of us makes our own choice for that, but it really is a matter now of going to your cutting table and making your backing. Step 7. So that step did not take very long, and you'll notice that my fray stopper has all lightened because it has dried. Now, you'll also notice that I have left my back pinned to my front. It is still pretty sides together. And now we get to pull out the scissors again. And again, this is a scary spot, because we are going to be carefully clipping the curves. So what happens when we turn this around, right side out, because right now we've got this pretty side to pretty side, which means it will be inside out. The curved spots don't lay well because they can't fan out properly. So what we do is we clip. We do not clip all the way to the interfacing, but we clip a good 2/3 to 3/4 of the way there. And the easiest way to know how far to clip your back panel is just to leave it attached to the front and do them both at the same time. So I don't need to clip anything straight. What I will do, people go, oh my goodness, she's going to actually, yeah, I'm cutting. I am going to, now notice, I cut off some of this corner because that's going to be a bulky spot when we turn this. Now, some people will cut it even closer. The trick is that if you cut it too close, when you turn it, you end up with a bit of a hole, and I don't want to have that happen. So I now have clipped my corners, and now I'm going to do this convex spot, and I'm going to go in about 2/3. So you can see now how far I went in. Now I'm going to do this rounded edge as well. Okay, for a minute there I thought it wasn't full. So any spot that is not a relatively straight edge, it doesn't have to be ramrod straight because a lot of times the bottom of a stocking has a bit of a curve to it, but it's really the toe and the heel and that inner ankle spot. So I'm going to continue my clipping right here in front of you, and you'll notice that because I did that fray check, that I don't get stressed about everything unraveling and only having a few shreds of thread left. Okay, so you can see I put one here at this particular tiny indent. I put 3 around here. The amount is up to you. And then all the way around here and up to here, I have clipped. So that is the end of step 7. So go to it, find your scissors, and be brave. Step 8. Okay, so it's think ahead time. We need to make our hanger. You can make the hanger out of a piece of ribbon, which is what I think that is how Annie Bees did hers. I'm seeing a little piece of yellow ribbon. Notice she didn't try to match her background or anything she put around the edge. Now, for this tutorial, I'm not putting anything around my edge. I'm keeping it super simple. One of my later tutorials, I will show you how you lay on your pom-poms, your lace, whatever you want to add if you want to sew it into the seam. But for this one, we're just going to make the stocking the shape, and that's it. So one of the things that I learned to do way back when I was first married over 40 years ago, when we didn't have a lot of things, is make braids. So I've braided nothing that matched my background. This is red, green, and B5200, nice bright white. So this is like 6 to 7 inches of a braid. So initially I cut my floss like 8 to 10 inches long, and I pinned it to my jeans. You'll see a picture. And then I braided it and I knotted off the other end. So that means that when I do this, I've got a loop. Now that loop looks pretty big, but we are going to enclose this a chunk of this on the inside, so this is how much is showing, and that is a fine size for me. If you want it smaller or larger, got squirrels playing outside, you can make that choice. So what do we do with this loop? Well, we have to ensure that when we are done the sewing, that it actually is on the correct side, because ask me how I know, you can end up with the loop on the inside, not the outside. So ahead of actually sewing this together, you want to actually lay it between the right and the wrong side, and just have the ends showing. And let's see if I can get this to work out. There we go. So this is the right side, this is the back, so right side to the pretty side of my backing. And I'm going to leave this hanging out, and I'm going to put it in like that, and I'll pin it. And that's how I'm going to sew it in. And I realize, so you have to sort of shift it over a bit so that it's next to the corner the way you want. I realize it's a bit uncomfortable because you now can't see the loop. But if you can see the loop, that means that when you turn it right side out, you will not see the loop. Yep, that's an important thing to understand. Okay. So it is now time to either sew by hand or with your sewing machine. If you are sewing by hand, I recommend doing a stitch like this that is a quilter stitch. I'm just going to put on my glasses, where I'm going to go beyond the end of the last stitch and put my needle in. Let's see if I can show you. So my needle is past this stitch, and then when I bring up the needle, I'm going to bring it up in the hole where the last stitch was. So the weird thing is that in order to go forward, your needle's going backwards. So let me do that again. So I'm going to put, it's actually tricky to do this backwards. So my needle comes in here. It comes up where the last stitch went down, and we pull it. So you end up with a straight line of actually very strong stitching. I sleep under a quilt that was done completely by hand by my grandmother using this stitch. We have no leaking of batting over 50 years later. Well, not quite 50 years. It was made of my grade 8 graduation dress. So that's a recommended. If you just do a running stitch, so I'm just going to show you what a running stitch is. So that would be a running stitch, where you go down, up, down, up. You have places where your stuffing can actually start poking out. And if you are somebody that really likes to stuff it good and have a nice firm stuffing like Fauna Pfeiffer, there's going to be spots where it just starts to show. Now, in an ideal world, you're going to match your thread to the color that you're sewing on. Today, I'm doing everything in a white thread so that the contrast makes it a little bit easier for you to see. So whether you choose to do this by hand or on a sewing machine, it's now time to sew your front to your back, so pretty side to pretty side, and make sure your loop is loop hidden in between those two layers. Step 9. And now it is time to turn this right side out. So you can see I've got my stitching all around. This is showing at the edge. I've trimmed this. There is about 1/4 of an inch to each of those points that I want to actually be points. And after I was finished sewing, I did trim. I put these in closer. That one might even need to be a bit closer yet. You do not want to cut through your stitches because that will mean you're back to sewing it again. So you've got your spot in the bottom, and now it is time, and I'll try to do this sitting up so that you can see I'm just pushing things through. And to the best of my ability, I pull on the backing more than I pull on the stitch itself. Okay, so it's starting to come through. Here we go. I can see my number 1. Oh, and look at that. My loop is there. So I use a chopstick. Now, I'm not using the pointy end because I don't want to poke through the material. I can actually pull on my loop and I'm trying to get the shape of my stocking. I'm going to stick my finger in. We will end up wanting to press this before we end up, now that I've got a basic stocking. Isn't that cute? So I'm going to be careful not to push all the way through, but I do want to see if I can get a bit of a better point at that top corner. So I'm just using this. And one of the things that you can do very carefully as well is take a pin or a needle. Can you see that that corner isn't quite what I want? So I'm going to pull a little bit. So I'm just taking my needle and pulling it out a bit at a time so that I get a better corner. Okay, that's looking reasonable. My heel is looking wonky. So carefully, I put in the point and I try to run it along my sewing line where I know that I put a curve. And I'm starting to get a heel shape there, right? Ah, see, that's a better heel. Okay, so right now we've got this hole at the bottom, but we need that because now you're going to stuff this guy. Step 10. And here I am with, yes, you guessed it, some polyfill. Now, will I use all this? Probably not. But you don't know. Like if you watch Fauna Pfeiffer and her wonderful tutorials on how to do things, she doesn't stuff her stockings, but she will say, when in doubt, add some more stuffing. Now, some people like to have a little bit of a flatter look to their stocking. You get to pick how full you want your stocking. So one of the things I did was I just started putting it in so that I'd have a little bit up there. So we grab our polyfill and we pull it apart so that it's nice and fluffy when we push it in. Now you can use lizard litter if you don't have a nut allergy like I do. And I will say to you, if you're giving these as gifts, you don't know sometimes if somebody has a nut allergy. My niece's little one, we discovered, does have a walnut. She's not allergic to every nut, but she is allergic to walnuts. And so lizard litter is just not an option. If she played with this and then touched her face, she would be in trouble. So again, I'm just pulling apart more. And then I'm stuffing in, and you're going to end up using your finger on the inside and you can see I'm just trying to poke it through. And you might even end up, so I'm using my finger to push through to get some of it in the toe. And if I feel like my finger isn't doing a good enough job, I will end up going back to my chopstick. So I'm like, okay, so how's that? Is that about right for stuffing of a stocking? I think I need just a little bit more. So this is not a very big stocking, and yet I did shove a fair amount of polyfill in there. And okay, is my bird? Yeah, my bird's looking good. You can see that when it got down to it, my stitching goes almost to the edge, almost to the edge. So I'm just shoving my finger up a little bit. My puppy's looking out to see if there's any squirrels to play with. Okay. Putting this much more into the toe. Okay, so off you go. You need to stuff your stocking. Step 11. All right, you're almost done. So now you are going to thread a needle with just a normal thread. I suppose you could use floss if you need to, because not everybody has as much thread as I do. And I'm going to actually knot it at the bottom, so this is going to be double. It means I can't lose my needle if I drop something. We're going to grab our stocking. And what you're going to find is that at this opening, you don't actually have the edge of the material. It's folded under because of the seam that you were using. So I'm going to come up, and I just have to go out of the range here for a moment to set it up. Okay, so right here, this is the opening, and I'm coming up by my last stitch. And then I'm just going to make sure everything is nice and shut. Okay, so I've just pinched this so that it's going to stay shut. We can manipulate this further once we have this done, although I have to admit I now want to put just a little bit more in the toe. And this is what Vonna says, when in doubt, you'll probably end up wanting to put a little bit more stuffing in than you thought you were. Yeah, it's amazing how much goes into a little stocking. Okay. So I did match my thread to my material, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a tiny stitch of the backing and pull it through, and then I'm going to go to the front, so my Lugana, oops, sorry about the puppy, and I'm going to take a tiny stitch here that is running parallel to the seam. And then I'm going to come up here, take another tiny stitch of the back, and put my needle in parallel to that into the front, and then it's like 1/8 of an inch. Let's see if I can get it. So that I'm stitching the back to the front every 1/8 of an inch or so. And because I'm doing a tiny stitch into the backing, and then I go to the front, and the thread is actually inside, where it's running is inside of the seam. That will make it so that when we finish this, you don't actually see your stitching. Now, some people do prefer to use a little bit of Aleene's fabric glue to glue it shut first, and then do some finishing stitching once they know they've got it in exactly the place that they want. Totally legit. So that is what your final step is for making a stocking. You've made it to step 12, the last step. So I have just sewn this closed, and you can't see my stitching. So now you're stuck with needle and thread and an ornament. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to make a knot in the thread, but not right against your stocking. So I'm going to, so I have looped around, and you can see that I'm somewhat controlling the fact that it's going to be up a little bit of the ways from the stocking. So I'm going to close that off. Okay, so I've got a knot right there. So now we are going to go back down, and then I'm going to run it to the back. And when I get to that knot, I'm going to give it a little tug. That's all the tug it took. Now the knot is buried on the inside, and I can clip this off right next, and ta-da. We have a stocking. Now, I will also, before you see it on my next floss tube, end up giving this a bit of a press so that, now not everybody does this, depends how much proof you want. Polyfill will melt a little bit if you put some heat on it. And again, I'm not going to do it from the front, I'm going to do it from the back, but it will flatten it out just a titch, and I think make the stocking shape fully complementary. But isn't that cute? So this is your first way to finish a mini stocking or any shape as a shaped pillow. I hope you have fun with it. I know you'll be a pro at it after you do 12 of them. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that this has helped you to think out one way of doing your stocking as a shaped pillow. You can control whatever that shape is. This method is not only for a stocking. You can use it on those cute little bunnies and mice that we have had released at Nashville. I believe they're a Stacy Nash design. You can do this for any shaped pillow that you would like and create a very interesting dough bowl that is absolutely delightful and uniquely yours. Thank you for joining me. Happy stitching.